I could not believe what I was seeing. I could have filled the back of his head with 5.56, which is an absolute joke.
Well, it's not an ape, because if the Sasquatch was an ape, we would already have one.
What are these elusive hominids that stalk the wilderness? Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to the mystery. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. For those of you who listened to last week's episode, episode 98, we had Walter on, and tonight we have Adam with us, who was with Walter during that encounter. Adam, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
We appreciate it. It's always great to talk to other people who are in a situation together. We'd hoped to have Walter too, but apparently he's sleeping, so we'll let him rest. And Tom, I'm going to have you go ahead and kick things off here.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, good to talk to you. And it's, I think, just straightforward. Start from the beginning, and let's hear what happened.
All right. So basically, Walter and I had been discussing going out because he was kind of itching to go to get out and about. And our other team member, everyone basically was just kind of stir crazy, and they needed some, I guess, some outside time, myself included. So we got this idea, and I had been researching a local state park in Walter's area for a while, and I had seen some. Quite a few encounters in that area. So he and I had been discussing going out there, and then it just became a reality. So we just kind of packed our gear up, and then he lives about 45 minutes to an hour away from me. So we met at his house. We kind of like discussed a kind of plan. We were going to get on location, poke around, take some B-roll, definitely, kind of interview each other, and just see what we can find. So we get to his house, and then we decided, hey, let's just go in one vehicle. So we all piled into his car, and we stopped at our first location, and I mean, it was a dark road. You couldn't really see us from the street, you know, and everything we were using, we had forgotten regular flashlights, which, you know, shame on me. So all we had was some infrared flashlights and infrared cameras. So we're out there and we're poking around and we're just kind of seeing what we can find, and then we noticed this old truck come around the corner, and it was accelerated, and I was like, oh, what is this? And anyway, this gentleman, he rolls up, and so I'm standing at his door. And I was like, okay, well, maybe we can talk to this guy and you know, get some inside info. Maybe he knows like a hotspot or whatever. And so I'm standing there, and I had a T-shirt on, and basically it's a black T-shirt with a yellow circle, and then there's a Bigfoot logo inside, typical Sasquatch cutout, and then it says on the outside it's Sasquatch research team. So it was a novelty T-shirt, and I liked it, so I just got it. And I'm wearing a hoodie, and I got it zipped up halfway, but you can still see that logo, right? So this guy, we're talking to him. He goes, hey, are you guys broke down or? And we're like, no, we're just looking around, taking some video. So then he looks at my shirt, and then he kind of looks up at me. And he goes, Are y'all Bigfoot hunters or something to that effect? I don't remember the exact verbiage. And I was like, yeah. Do you know of like any areas, heard any stories, anything like that? He goes, hold on. So he goes over and parks, and I was kind of excited. I was like, oh, cool. We're going to interview this guy, get some local intel, and we'll go on our way. So he gets out, he comes over, we get his name and all that stuff. And we said, hey, look, can we interview you? Do you mind us using your image? Because all this stuff was planned to be put on our YouTube channel. But honestly, I haven't touched it since, because the entire thing just spooked me. And up until recently, when I had to look through it, and I sent Will a clip of some vocalizations. And so anyway, we interview the guy, and we ask him, so you from around here? And he says, no, I've been up in Colorado for a while, and you guys are gonna have to bear with me because I'm trying to remember like all the details. There was just so much that happened that I think my brain wanted to just shut out most of it. Anyway, we're talking to this guy. He gives us this info. His story changes slightly as we're talking, because it went from he was in Colorado for a while, and then all of a sudden he's been there his entire life, which it was a red flag for me. And so he said, hey, well, I know a couple places if you guys want to follow me. And I mean, honestly, like it's the whole, hey kid, hop in the van, I got a bike in here type of thing, and I was like, no. In my mind, I was like, no. But then the other part of me was like, man, what if there's something to it? Like what if we can get something on video? I mean, I've heard vocalizations before this incident, except at the time I didn't know what they were until I started poking or digging around, and then I heard similar sounds to what I had heard years ago. But like the devilish part of me wanted to see one of these things, alive and kicking. So I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And as he's walking to his truck, we're walking to the car. Walter got a quick video of his license plate, and basically saying, hey, look, this guy's name is so-and-so. If anything happens, his license plate is blah, 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 blah. So we follow this guy, and it's not too far down the road. You come up to a bridge. There's basically a dried out creek. It was probably, I don't know, maybe a mile-ish from where we were. And he's telling us some stories that he had actually been in the area. He had seen one time just kind of creeping through the field. And as I had to walk back to the car to change out a battery, and as I'm rummaging through the vehicle in the gear bag to locate this battery, I hear like a bark, and I'm like, there must be a house over there. in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, that's not a big deal. But then I hear sniffing, like this dog is trying to, find out what's on the other side. I'm like, well, that's odd, because the dog probably would have continued barking. Like my dogs would, they wouldn't stop. And so I ignored it because, it barked once and I didn't say anything, didn't do anything, didn't move. I just kept looking for what I was looking for. Then it stopped barking. I was like, all right, cool. Then it started sniffing. And I was like, man, it's kind of creepy. There's really nothing going on. Our other team member had heard footfalls, and I did hear some noises in the tree line. But still, I'm thinking, okay, it's possible that that's somebody's house. Maybe there's a dog or whatever. But as we're like discussing it later, weeks and weeks later, it was. She said it was more like it was heavy footfalls. So it wasn't like, a little puppy, trotting through the foliage. And so anyway, we're kind of losing interest because nothing's going on. He goes, well, I do. Our tour guide, Tom, and I'm stealing that from you. He said, well, I know of another place. So if you want to follow me, it's like about 20 minutes down the road. And I'm like, man, 20 minutes. Like that, I don't want this guy taking us out in the boonies, And against my better judgment, I was like, we all agreed. And so we follow this guy, and he takes off like just a bat out of hell. And Walter's having a hard time keeping up. And these are like dirt roads, so this guy's like he's got an old beater pickup. It's like a late 80s C10 model. Those things are just built to take a beating. Anyway, we pull up on location. It's kind of like it's a through road, but there was a barrier gate just before the barrier gate where we parked. It was kind of like it looked like it was turned into a cul-de-sac. So we just kind of turned around and then faced the direction that we were coming from. And he gets out, we get out, and immediately I went and grabbed all the cameras, everything that I needed to document, because I'm going to tell you, as soon as we got out of the car, there was vocalization. There was some howls, and they were quite loud, but they sounded distant, so it was, to me, I was like, all right, so as soon as we walked up, like, these maybe coyotes, probably not coyotes, because they just sounded like they were huge coyotes, were howling, and then it stopped,
Hey, Adam.
Yeah.
Quick question. I'm putting myself into your kind of in your shoes,
Mm-hmm.
and I would be thinking, if I'm going down the road, am I going to end up in a spot, where this guy, where all of his friends are, what's going on? So I think I get that, where you're feeling a little bit nervous with this, following this guy.
Right.
The question I have is, in retrospect, have you looked back and have you asked yourself, because he takes you right to a hot spot, have you asked yourself, how did he know where to go? And what was he doing there in the first place?
Every single day since it's happened, I thought about it. Not 24/7, but
right throughout the day, it pops into your head.
Yeah, constantly. And like there was an entire conversation between the three of us in the car that I didn't even cover, because I don't want to extremely bore you guys with details.
Well, that's all right. Let's hear it.
But the whole time I was protesting, I was like, dude, this is a bad idea. Like, this is a really bad idea. I was like, we don't know this guy. Like, what if this is some down country, dueling banjos type of stuff,
Yeah, axe murderer or something like
Yeah,
that.
and honestly, look, in my younger days, I put myself in some really bad situations that could have ended quite differently.
Yeah. No, I think it's just being pragmatic.
Yeah, but
Another real quick question. You said the three of you, so it was you and Walter and this guy in the truck?
No. So there's this group. So myself and she goes by ZuZu. We started this group initially like a while ago, just as a bonding because we're just to spend more time together. Basically, it's a long story. Because we're both down for adventure. And I've been doing paranormal investigations since like 2006, 2008 for a while. So I was just always going out in the middle of nowhere, and trying to document paranormal. I didn't get into cryptozoology until a friend of mine who was just fascinated with Sasquatch. Not to get sidetracked or,
No, you're fine. Yeah,
But-
absolutely. So there's three of you. There's you, Walter, and ZuZu. Okay.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of I guess I'd be a little more encouraged if I was in your shoes, just to think, well, there's three of us and one of him, as long as it stays that way.
Right. And look, my first thought, very first thought was when he when he turned that corner and came onto that street, when he first saw us, I was like, this is an extremely weird situation. It almost seems planned, and I don't want to sound paranoid, but
I was thinking the same thing. It sounds staged.
it was just so odd, and like, everybody else in the group was just like, hey, no, I mean, we're ready. Let's do this. This is what we came to do.
So what were the boring details that you guys are discussing?
Look, I'm trying to like map where we're going because we're just following this guy. We don't know where we're going. And I'm trying to map this out. And as I'm mapping it, where the GPS showed that I was, it was so odd because after it happened, I had been trying to find the exact location where we were because I was thinking, okay, possibly I want to know what's out there, see if I can see anything on satellite imagery. And then there was a thought of possibly going out there during the day just to see, what the heck we were looking at, But it wasn't an argument. I mean, I started this group, but the way that I like to run it is we all have just as much say as everybody else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, democratic process.
Exactly. That's exactly how I envisioned it, and it works okay. But it was more or less, I got voted out. I got vetoed. So I was like, all right, fine. I'll just go and.
Okay, so you were against following this guy, and the other two were, yeah, let's follow him. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I mean, yes, that is correct. I mean, listen, part of me wanted to get to the final location and do exactly what we came out there to do, was to document a possible Sasquatch encounter, a sighting. Not really encounter, a sighting would have been great. Just bear with me a second. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. So basically, you guys had a brief democratic process, and okay, majority rules said let's do it,
right?
And reluctantly, you're going along with this, but part of you is like, okay, well, let's see where this leads, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was just an internal struggle. I wanted to turn around, but then I wanted to proceed.
Okay, sure. No, and that's understandable.
But the thing is, I would have proceeded if our tour guide wasn't there. It just threw me off. It was so weird, and I just couldn't wrap my head around
the fortuitousness of
it was
tour
just
guide.
so odd. It was
Adam,
just so odd.
I'm with you, man. I would have backed away from that dude, I think.
Yeah, well, here's the other question I have thinking about this. I mean, the guy just shows up and he's like, he's kind of like everything you want. Hey, I'll take you there. I'll show you where they're at. Did you have any thoughts about how did this guy know where to go? And I'm kind of curious about this character because I want to, well, one of the questions I have and I asked Walter was, what was his demeanor like? What sort of attire? It sounds like he was semi-military attired.
Well, I mean, to me, it looked like he just came off of a shift working on a road crew. And to be honest, it smelled like he had been working in the heat all day. Okay. But yeah, he did wear from the waist down, possibly military. Yeah. Okay. The shirt was a typical bright green safety shirt with built-in reflection strips.
Oh, okay. And so again, I just go back to, I wonder how he knew, A, where they're at, and B, how he seemed to be so kind of outreach, kind of gregarious in saying, hey, listen, I'll take you to where they're at. Yeah,
I've been juggling this over in my mind since it happened. And I mean, it's just theory after theory. Some of them make sense in discussion about this gentleman and how he actually located us. But we both can't come to an agreement on what we saw that night. So basically, what I remember is I remember the exact same truck parked on the road crossing at our first stop when we got out, and it was the dark dirt road. This same truck pulled over on the shoulder on the main road that was crossing that road. And then the gentleman got out, and it looked like he was looking at his headlight, like maybe he hit something. He was there for quite a few minutes, and then he actually got back in the truck and left. But ZuZu specifically remembers a white sedan, and I don't remember that. I'm not saying that the car wasn't there. All I can say is what I remember. You know what I mean? But sure. Honestly, her memory, in her defense, is excellent. She has an excellent memory because she'll throw things at me that I don't remember.
So she's demonstrated good memory.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me. I want to just kind of paint this picture a little bit. So you see this guy. You see the truck. He's examining his headlight, mm-hmm. and ZuZu says there's a sedan there, a white sedan.
Right.
And I wish we had her on the call because I'd like to get some details on that.
Actually, we can get her on the call.
Well, let's do it.
All right, hold on one sec.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen. ZuZu is with us.
Okay. Hi, ZuZu. This is Tom.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Doing very well, thank you. How are you tonight?
Very good. So what we were talking about was, maybe you heard it or not, Adam was just describing when you guys ran into this guy. He was examining his headlight or something. He was out of his truck, and you had noticed a sedan. What can you tell us about the sedan? Where was it parked? Fill us in.
Okay. So where we were parked was, however, I don't know the distance, maybe like 40 yards from, maybe not even that, 20 to 40 yards from the crossroad. So the crossroad came and there was, let's say, a little bridge going over. It was maybe like an early 90s kind of sedan, something kind of like a Buick. And it started driving and then it stopped. And then it drove forward a little bit more, and then it stopped, and it just sat there for what seemed like a long time, but it was at least a few minutes. And I just thought that was strange, so I was staring at it, and then it just peeled out and took off. And then from there, shortly thereafter, the truck came with the gentleman, and he was talking to us, and he said that his friend had called him and said that somebody was having car problems. And he told the friend, oh, no, it's probably just somebody broken down. He said, no, the car is too new. Somebody's probably having car problems. So he said he drove over to see us and see if we needed some help. And Adam was probably closest to him, maybe like 2 feet from him. And then I was just behind him. And that's when, he's saying, well, what are we doing out here, et cetera. And he and I were both wearing shirts that had like a large yellow emblem with a Bigfoot. And I saw him drop his eyes and look at Adam and then drop his eyes and look at me. And then he said, y'all out here for Bigfoot, aren't you? And then what I thought was so strange is he said verbatim, I've been waiting for y'all. And,
Really?
from there, yeah, it was very strange. So I didn't,
Wait a second. Hold on a second.
Yeah, see, honestly, that's a detail that I don't remember, and it's possible that I just wanted to scrub it from my mind because that's a really odd thing to say.
Okay. Yeah, that's way out there. So he says, I've been waiting for y'all. Did anybody ask him why or how?
See, I'm very detail oriented. My friends joke about my elephant memory, and that in particular really stood out. And immediately, I felt myself kind of stop and stare at him, but he would continue to talk after that. So I did not get the opportunity to ask him per se, but that's when he kind of started saying that, there's people that have come out before looking, etc. And then he kind of gave us the invitation, would y'all like to go someplace? I can take you some places where I guarantee that they will be there. And I'm very much of an adventurer. So I was like, hell yes.
Yeah. Let me back up for 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back to the sedan. So while you're having this conversation, the sedan is still there or is it peeled out?
No. The sedan was first. We got there, we parked, we were, getting their equipment together, etc. And just kind of looking at the area. And when we were doing this, just kind of starting filming, checking out the equipment, the sedan was driving by. And it was just as if, he'd been driving down the road and looked and saw us. Because when he stopped, it was not a casual stop. It was like a screeching stop, And then he kind of stopped for a minute. And then he drove forward a little bit. And then he stopped again. And it was a long pause. Then it was what I would think was a few minutes. And then he peeled out of there.
Okay, so you think that your presence, your arriving, is what triggered him?
Yes.
Okay. You wouldn't know if it was a Ford Crown Victoria or what type of sedan. Did you happen to notice?
I actually I don't know cars very well, but the image of the car is imprinted in my mind. So I actually wanted to look at pictures before I spoke to you so I could tell you exact, but it was what I would imagine is that kind of car. Like, I was thinking like a Buick or a Victoria, something like that kind of, kind of what you imagine, like we would joke it back in the day that your grandparents would drive or something.
Okay. How many people were in the car?
Could not see it. They were too far away from us and the windows were dark.
Could it be like a government or a police car or?
No, not like a police car.
Right. And when I say police car, I don't mean with the lights and everything. I was thinking maybe like an unmarked or something.
Okay. I thought you meant like specifically a police car, but yes, that style, correct. Adam just pulled up a picture. So actually looking at it, that is exactly the style car it was, and it was white.
And what are we looking at? What, Adam?
Looking at 2008 Crown Vic.
Okay.
I would say it was maybe like an older model because it kind of had that 90s, trying to be a smaller car, more, they had to kind of a boxy, kind of more.
Okay.
Like
I know what you're talking about.
Oh, so.
I think it was like late 80s, early 90s model.
Yeah, so it'd be like the square ones, which was like the late 80s, early 90s Crown Vic, the LTD.
So I'm going to go into a tiny detail, may seem insignificant, but did you notice if it had like chrome detailing, chrome
yes,
strips on it?
Another thing that stood out to me was the detailing on the car, because I think like these kind of cars more popular with like younger kids and stuff now, like collecting. So I see like they put the rims on it and those kind of details. So to me, it kind of looked out of place, like a car would imagine to see in the city, not there in the woods.
Yeah, it's very possible that we actually caught this on camera because at the time we had 2 cameras running. And man, I've got 14 gigabytes of video to review that I haven't touched. So.
Okay. Well, let's, so getting back to the guys out there, he's looking at his headlights. Crown Victoria comes by, peels out of there, and you feel that there may have been a connection between the guy in the truck and the Crown Victoria. Those two seem to be possibly connected.
Absolutely, because he said the reason he came out there is that his friend had called him and said that someone was broken down. So to me, it was just strange that I'm the kind
like
of
a cover story.
Yes, if I saw someone broken down, I would stop and help them. So I thought it was strange that he would do that long pause and peel out, and then the friend comes to help. So that was his story for why he showed up.
Right. Never underestimate intuition or the power of intuition. Okay, so now this guy's saying, hey, listen, he's inviting you to go. Let's go look at where the Bigfoot are. And for some reason, he seems to know where they are, which we're going to find out in a little bit. And you've probably asked yourself time and again, how did he know? Not only that, we're coming there, but how did he know where the creatures are?
Yes, and he did say that he had grown up in that area. So he was very familiar with the land and where things were, different hunters. And he did also mention a story that his uncle had an encounter.
Okay.
So in my mind, when he said that I've been waiting for y'all, part of me thought, this is so strange. And then the other part thought, because he was talking about Bigfoot and asking questions, well, maybe this is someone who just always kind of had that curiosity. And a lot of people are really reserved. They either think it's absurd and ridiculous idea, or they're curious and think it's a possibility. And he seems just possibly interested in, well, maybe this is somebody that I can go hunting with, and go look for it. So I'm not just by myself.
Sure. All right. So, just continue on. So what happens next? You're following him or he's following you?
He got in the car. We got in the car. And he had a big old truck, and Walter has some kind of little car. And so he took off. And this is, not a paved road. So we tried to keep up with him, and we went to an area. It was like right over a creek. We parked and then we walked towards just a little bridge over the water. But it was really dry at the time. So there was no water. So we went out there and just kind of investigated, did some recordings. And that's when Walter was recording Adam interviewing this guy. But unfortunately, the audio didn't come through. But when that happened, that's when I heard walking next to us in the trees. And I also smelled like, kind of like BO, like musky smell. And I said to Walter, did you hear those steps? And he said, yeah, he did. And it was remarkable to me because it was dry at the time, which is also why where the brook was, it was no water. And it sounded like heavy steps and big steps. Just going out in the woods and seeing deer and different little critters, it did not sound like something like that. And it seemed like it was kind of following us a little bit. And then it just stopped and I didn't hear any more steps. So I think maybe they did a few howls and we just listened. And he said, well, I know another spot and there should be water in the brook there. So we took off to the second location, following him. And that's where we got out of the car. And to me, it was remarkable. Like instantly from the time we got out of the car, it was just, when we went out on this excursion, I really did not expect anything to happen, but it was exciting. It's always fun to go on an adventure. When we got out of the car, it was what I would imagine like being in the jungle or something. Very, very loud calls and multiple voices, like multiple persons making this sound. And it sounded like very frantic. I don't know if they were warning each other, but I was really caught off guard how many we were hearing and how loud it was and very primal. I mean, literally sounding like monkey sounds. It was not anything I'd even heard from any even shows I've seen, which blows my mind because they go out there and they have all this gear and they don't really get anything. They might hear some knocks or some whistles, but we heard just continuous howls going back and forth and we could hear movement. And then they stopped and we heard these cows. We started walking over towards where there's a private road and it was gated off. And we heard these cows and they did not sound right. They sounded strange and we were commenting on that. And so the gentleman was going to step over, he was going to climb over the little gate and go. And he walked maybe 15 or 20 feet and then the cows stopped. So then he came back and then we started walking towards where the water was, kind of like investigating and seeing could we see anything, since at that point they were more silent. And that's when Adam saw the scat and we had a little quick show and tell. And we were scanning the trees. They were kind of lofting small rocks at us, kind of across the way. And I could see the rocks coming. So that was very strange, but seeing the direction, and then we could hear them kind of splitting up around us because there were sounds coming from different directions. And supposedly, I don't know if it was or not, but the gentleman, our guide, it was like a small limb from a tree hit him on the head. And that's when he started getting like really nervous and went back to the truck and Walter was checking on him. And
so the tour guide got hit with a limb?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Just maybe a small broken up piece that was from around. Let's see.
Yeah, but I want to interject on that.
Yeah, that's why I said so. I'm not sure.
Even though I was like anybody in the right mind, ZuZu wasn't scared. She wasn't visibly shaking.
I literally said that night.
It was the most
terrifying,
insane
but
thing to me. But I didn't lose any of my,
You kept your composure.
I didn't lose. I knew why I was there, and I was doing what I needed to do while I was there. In saying that, our tour guide, I made sure for the most part that he was at least within my periphery, because there was just some
questioning
shenanigans. In my opinion, there were shenanigans. Now, the stick issue, I'm going to tell you, like, I'm at least 97% sure that was self-inflicted.
Yeah, and he did say that immediately after. And the reason why I wanted to mention that, so I'm glad that you said that, but because the rocks that were coming, I visually saw them come from across the water. So that was something coming from the other side.
Yeah, I mean, that's even on camera. Like, there's rocks actually being thrown in front of me, while everyone was basically behind me. And you can actually see them zoom right past the camera. And I didn't even realize it. But you can hear them hit the ground. I mean, it's not like bugs or whatever. And actually, when I was reviewing it, looking for a clip of the howls and other vocalizations for Will, I did notice the rock, and I was like, oh, that's weird. But I'm going to tell you, like, I honestly believe that site is actually it's a situation of habituation. Because there were just certain things that our tour guide was doing as we're walking around, like strange whistles. But I don't know. It was just so strange. It was so strange. It was just so strange. I can't say that enough.
All I can say is, as it was happening, Adam and I were definitely sizing up this gentleman. And he was definitely more weary of him, but I definitely know the things that I saw, the things that I heard that could not have been from him. Yeah. So
I mean, I'm not going to say everything was.
Let me ask this real quick.
Yeah.
So you guys are coming to this kind of the same conclusion or suspicion that I am, that this is a mixture, maybe some theatrics, but you did see a creature, right?
So Eyeshine, definitely. I saw Eyeshine a couple times.
I also saw Eyeshine. And
there was one point, like, there's actually a 13-minute video clip where, as these things are coming on my right, or thing, whatever, you hear a splash in the water, and I even say on the camera, it's in the water. And in my mind, I pictured it
just to give you an idea how close.
It just crossing over to, I guess, I don't know, flank us, run around, flank us. But it was scurrying on my left. But before the scurrying happened, I did see it was a glimpse. It wasn't, and I wasn't 100% certain what I saw, but I kept panning the camera over there because, I mean, I was using a full spectrum camera with an 850 nanometer flashlight. So, I mean, I could see pretty well, but it's like these things were just staying, I don't know, it's like they knew exactly where my limit was, so they were staying just out of reach of my camera. But I did see a shape, and then it kind of ducked down, and then I kept trying to look for it. On this video, you see me panning over constantly to my right side and zooming in on certain spots because I was looking for it because I knew I saw something. I just wasn't 100% certain. I didn't want to say that I saw, a Bigfoot because I wasn't certain. But I did see a shape. It ducked down, and I didn't see anything else.
For myself,
how fast was it when it ducks down? Was it like?
It was. It was like. It was pretty quick. It's like I looked over, but it wasn't even with the camera. I had the camera because I was being distracted by someone else. I don't remember what they were talking about, but I was panning over with the camera in that direction to my right. It was probably about my 10 o'clock, and then I heard something over I panned over to my left, and I heard something over on my right. When I turned my head to the right, it was just right at the embankment where it drops down into the creek. And then as soon as I looked over at it, that area to find the source of the noise, it dropped immediately. So then I panned my camera over, and I kept seeing what I thought were eyes, but it ended up like I zoomed in, and it was like just the reflection of my the infrared light on like random leaves. But when things started happening a lot more quickly, things started escalating as far as the sounds and the scurrying and the noises.
And stomping.
There was stomping. There was growls at our 12 o'clock. This thing was like, the thing on my right was, it was like, it went from 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, back up to 2. And I was like frantically trying to pan the camera to look for it, and it was there and I just couldn't see it. You know what I mean?
Adam and I were looking in the same direction because he kept saying, I'm seeing eye shine. And I was pointing because I saw the same thing. So what I also saw was a shape. And that's why I told him I wanted to go back there in the daytime and see where was the tree, like how high from where we saw, because it was more like he was just peeking around the side of the tree and looking at us, and then going behind the tree and then looking at us. But I couldn't see anything clearly. Like he said, it was a shape, but it was a shape of a creature behind a tree, peeking at us, getting behind the tree, peeking at us. Because I saw in the video, I don't know, I haven't looked at the video, but you could see where was the dark shape, and then it would move, and then it would come back.
Yeah, that was the cell phone footage that Walter had taken, where you do briefly see the eye shine twice as he pans the camera over. And I don't think that he saw it. He caught it when he was actually videotaping.
Because he was looking at a different direction.
Yeah, he looked over to
the left.
Yeah, he was looking to his left, and this thing was probably about maybe his 1 o'clock. So he's panning the camera over, trying to, I guess, find whatever, and then it glances over. You see the eye shine, and then you don't see anything. And then it comes back over. You see it again, and then you see it blink, and that's what really threw me off. There was a definite blink because it disappeared quick, and then it came back, and then the camera pans away. And as it's panning away, I'm sorry?
No, the blinking, the eye shine. A couple questions. Do you know what? I guess the question I want to know is the color of the eye shine. Was it kind of how would you describe that?
So it was like a white to like light amber. So it was like, I guess, the color of an old car's headlights. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, sure. Right. And how high up do you think it was?
Man, if I had to guesstimate, because I was actually standing on the embankment. I was standing up higher. I was standing up higher than where Walter was. So I couldn't really tell you. Maybe, after messing with the lighting on that video.
Yeah, and you have to be accurate. Just kind of a...
I'm going to say maybe anywhere from between 7 and 9 feet is going to be my rough guesstimation.
Yeah.
And you probably, the other question I have is hopefully you've seen enough eye shine of whatever, deer, raccoons, etc. to know this is a biological thing. And you saw a blink, right?
Yes, and it was really quick. But like I looked at his video image, his camera, his phone image or video, I'm sorry, for days, and I was trying to get the lighting bright enough and not lose any pixelation to see if I can make out, the beast that he saw.
Yeah, right.
And I just, every time I couldn't get it bright enough and then, maintain pixelation, it just.
Also, after that happened, the rocks that they were throwing, and I hate even saying throwing because to me it was kind of like, I don't know, I've heard before like them being playful, throwing rocks. I mean, definitely they were alerted that we were there, but I still personally, even though it was terrifying because it was so intense, did not feel threatened. But they were throwing the rocks and then it came around to our right side and they were coming from that direction as well. So it felt like they were kind of moving around us, trying to flank us or something.
Mm-hmm. How hard were the rocks? What were the size of the rocks and how hard were they being thrown?
They were not being thrown hard. They were probably about maybe 1 to 2 inches. Not 1 inch, probably about like 2 inch size, rocks.
Yeah, they weren't tiny pebbles. I mean, it was a definite attempt.
It was to get our attention.
To get our attention and let us know that, they.
But I mean, they were landing near us, in front of us. They weren't throwing them at us. I might have been scared then.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what you've said so many times in the past. It starts off, it's a progression, but it starts off with those little rocks or maybe sticks or pine cones. And then if you don't respond, how long were you guys there?
You know what?
On the rocks?
It seemed, actually, you know what? I'm going to tell you. We were there. As soon as we walked in, as soon as we got out of the car, it was just, I'm going to tell you when it really escalated is when we walked over to the tree and noticed that scat.
Like maybe we interrupted.
Yeah. I'm thinking that, it was, an interruption to private time.
Yeah. How big was the scat? Without getting gross.
I'm going to say 1.5 inches, 2 inches diameter, maybe 5 inches long.
Okay.
It looked like a grown man had been there.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I ask you, why did you ask that about the car? Like, how do you know? In my mind, it's just shocking to me because it's just like you just reached it out of my mind.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have that capability. No, I was just curious. You mean with the chrome detailing and that sort of thing?
Because that is exactly what stood out to me was the style car it was and how white it was and the chrome detailing. So when you said that, you just caught me off guard.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't mean to catch you off guard.
It's very random when she's caught off guard or shaken.
All right. I don't know if I'll take it as a compliment or not.
Or rare. No, it's a compliment.
I was just curious if, sometimes some of the higher end vehicles, they have that kind of chrome trim and that sort of thing.
But even just when you said the Crown Victoria, just because it's a police car, or?
Yeah, typically.
Were you thinking that maybe it was a cop that was stopping to check on us, and that's why he did the pause, or?
Law enforcement.
I was just curious what it was.
Okay. Well, you just immediately guessed it, so I thought, like, my God, have you had an experience?
Well, yeah, I haven't had that experience. But it's just curiosity. That's all.
Right.
Okay.
We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think Adam mentioned to me that when Walter went out with Joe, that that a hunter came through and was doing the deer feed. So there's some things that I think that seem strange. Like, for example, the saying that, well, there's no hunting in this area, but, there is always a lot of illegal hunting that goes on. And I wouldn't even be surprised if someone had, a deer feeder out there illegally. It is just strange that to be in such a dense, unpopulated area, that each time somebody had come out and was just kind of nearby or checking on them.
Yeah, and very helpful too, I might add.
Yeah. And I'm going to have to tell you, the gentleman, the tour guide, because everything was so strange about that. And being an adventurer, I have a lot of strange encounters like that. So on one hand, it's not strange to me at all. But I tried looking him up. I tried plugging different things, just remembering what he had said, the area, although he was dressed for like a working man, maybe construction or some sort like that. Yet he said he did music producing. So I just thought it was very strange that I could find nothing about him. So it's to me, which makes him an even bigger mystery in the puzzle.
Yeah. Did he ever give a name or introduce himself?
It was a moniker. It was obviously a nickname.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't give us, any John Doe type of name.
Yeah, no way and so you can't really stay in contact with him, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, you guys have absolutely fascinating, another perspective, another facet to this encounter. So I want to thank both of you for taking the time to be with us tonight. And do you have any questions for us?
He probably has a lot.
You know what, Mr. Jevning, without gushing too much, I've been a fan for quite some time.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Starting with, a show once upon a time we won't talk about.
Right.
Yeah, it's a real honor actually to come on the show tonight and, just kind of get this off my chest.
I really appreciate it. And, like when Walter said the same thing, and so do many people actually, when you have an outlet, you're able to talk out to somebody, about what happened. And especially, I've stood in front of these things fairly close when I was young, so I can totally sympathize with you and everyone else who's had an encounter like that, what you go through. And it's not a one-time thing you go through. It sticks with you the rest of your life.
Yeah.
For me, in an exciting way. I
would like to say that I'm not going to do this again.
I wouldn't.
But I'd be lying to you. I can't. Years ago, in a very large metropolitan city, almost in the middle of it, I had an experience. It was some extreme vocalization, and Will, I sent you an email and gave you like a brief rundown.
Yeah.
But it was like in the most obscure areas where it shouldn't happen,
Mm-hmm.
But after it happened a couple years later, I didn't realize I was like, that had to be demonic. But once my friend turned me on to Sasquatch, I was like listening to a lot of the audio and vocalizations, and it was the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
In that, the growls, I'm going to tell you, the growls to me, like I call it it's a shotgun blast. And it hits you so hard. And, but typically, like for me, the first time, right before that, it was this intense like fear that just washed over me, just out of nowhere,
Yeah, absolutely.
And then all of a sudden, like I guess you get too close, and then they just hit you with that that growl. I can't.
I know. I got growled at once. I can I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's so haunting, but
yeah, that's when he wanted to go. It's time.
That's what I did. I turned around and I said, "Oh no, the hell with this! I'm out of here."
Absolutely.
See, I'm the exact opposite. I feel like this is what I came to see and hear, and I can't believe we got so lucky.
Yeah.
I just truly am amazed and stupefied how many vocalizations were occurring. Just, I would think that knowing we were there, I almost thought, like, did we catch them off guard and they were, hey, bring some milk home with you,
You probably interrupted something they were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have theories and really nothing I want to talk about out loud.
Right.
Maybe we can get together later and I'll, discuss them.
Yeah, we can chat another time.
Okay. And also, look, like I said, I have 14 gigs of video. If you guys want to see any of it.
Absolutely, sure. We'll take a
none
look.
None of it's edited. You can just look through whatever you want. And there's some, the clip I sent you, that's just a tiny morsel of the vocalizations that were going on. But I will hear you. I will tell you, you're going to hear me a couple times saying, no, we got to go. Let's go. Let's go now. Let's go. So don't judge me too harshly, please.
Honestly, if I think I had not been there, Walter and Adam would have left long before.
That's actually a true story. Yeah.
Well, listen, folks, we're about out of time.
Thank you.
Let's definitely plan on chatting sometime here. I know you have questions and things we can probably answer. So,
yes.
Get a hold of Tom and we'll set that up where we can just talk.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
All right.
Look
Good
forward
deal.
to it.
We certainly appreciate, both you taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, thanks for having us,
Likewise.
Tom. It was a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah,
I listened
you bet.
to you. I listened to
Why
you
don't
all
you guys
the
stay
time.
on the line and I'll just chat for a minute or two.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank y'all.
Welcome back from the break, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the follow-up we did with Adam and ZuZu in the first segment, in connection with the previous show with Walter, because they were also present with Walter, although Walter had the actual encounter there. But so I guess we're going to go on to some questions. Brian, do you want to start off with a question?
Yeah, I do have some, but to start off with, I don't know if you saw this. This just came out in the news about 3 days ago, and it actually ties into what we've talked about just a couple weeks ago, actually, about DNA being unknown primate, because there was a group, they're the SFBF, okay, and I don't know offhand what that stands for, but they found some supposed DNA. And remember how we were talking about how it would be great to get a university to look at the evidence? Well, they claim that they didn't, and they don't say what the university is, though. That's why I'm a little bit skeptical. But they say it's a prestigious university, and the results came back saying that, quote, it was a primate, but not like any primate that they could identify. So that kind of, as we were saying, as we've said before,
Yeah, sometimes I wonder, it's possible they did that, but you have to remember, to get a result like that, you're going to have to spend around $40,000 to do that. It's expensive. That's why, the case that I talked about, was done through a sheriff's department, and, that's the deputy got called in because of the huge expense to the sheriff's department, and the sheriff himself wanted to know why they spent so much money on that particular test, and it was actually a mistake by the crime lab. They apparently got their wires crossed when it come to what type of test they were supposed to do. So, but on the other hand, that is the result you would get because there's nothing in the database to compare it to.
Right. Okay, so on to some questions, particularly about some housing questions. Do you know of stories where where people may have had a bunch of encounters at their house or in their neighborhood and have actually got out of that neighborhood. They literally sold their house just to get away from their fears?
Yes, there have been. In fact, I always go back to the occult case because there was so much that happened during that 9-month time period. When the idiot, who was a guy who ran the Oregon Research Primate Center, the primatologist, came there and wrecked the situation by disturbing the area the creatures were routinely coming in. They got ticked off and went to the neighboring farm and destroyed their garden, and the family packed up and left. They abandoned the place and never came back. So there are accounts of that happening.
Yeah, and oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we have an account here in Oregon, a recent one. The family had a home. I guess it was going to be their retirement home. And if I remember it correctly, and this was very recent, this happened 3 months ago, the the homeowner, the guy walks out, he'd gone around the side of his barn, and there was one standing there, 7.5 foot tall, red, if I remember correctly, looking at him. Immediately put the house up on the market, sold it.
And I know of another or several other accounts where people have seen something and, they just don't want to be involved in it. They sell the house or just pack up and go.
Yeah, and if I recall, it's been a long time since I remember hearing about this story, and this is like, I don't know how long ago, but wasn't there a story one time where I guess the husband was out of town or, just away from the house, and the woman and her children kept having, if I recall correctly, they had like a barrel of fish or something, and they were under attack constantly, and they kept getting the fish stolen. And then the husband came back. And again, this is like a long time ago. I'm talking decades and decades ago. But I think the husband came back, and the woman told him about the story, and then he had some encounters, and they just got the heck out of there. Yeah, so do you recall that story at all?
I don't offhand. Do you know what area and time period it was from?
I think the early 1900s.
Yeah, I thought it was the 1930s, maybe the 40s in Canada. It was, I think the story is where the kids saw it and they thought it was a bear. Mom saw it, and I think it was on Vancouver Island.
Oh, are you talking about the Ruby Creek incident in John Green's book?
Yeah.
Okay, that was actually, I believe, on a native reservation. It was the Chapman family. And yeah, the kids saw it, thought it was a bear. They come running. The mother saw it, grabbed the kids and took off. And the creature came in and took some of the dried fish, excuse me, tipped over the barrel of fish, things like that. But they were definitely afraid of the creature.
Yeah, I think that barrel of fish was very heavy.
Yes.
Actually too heavy for a human to pick up. So yeah, I always like that story, and I think about some of the stories. I don't know of specific instances, but where people have either bought a house or sold their house for below market value, or somebody comes in and they're like, "Oh my gosh, look at this! What a great deal!" They buy a house under market value, and shortly thereafter they find out why it was sold at such a great price.
Well, and we've had them even from Australia. Remember my talking about the lady who contacted me for guidance? They had these creatures coming in, and I believe they had a church there, and it was very difficult for them to move, and that was my recommendation because of all the measures that they did employ and some that they would not employ, and I'm not sure why they did or didn't do those things that I recommended, but the situation kept escalating, and she did finally contact me about a year later and said that they were finally able to relocate, which was a good thing because, the factor of fear among, or what all was going on there was so high that they really needed to get out of there. And that's what happens with these things when they escalate to that point.
And also, what about, I'm thinking about Lee's story where he had, we know the location. It was in Oregon. It was on the coast somewhere. And they were leaving trash outside, and these things were coming in. And he went there to help them remediate, give them suggestions on remediating the situation, which led to
let me back
Lee
up.
had an adventure out of all of that.
Yeah, let me back up a little bit and explain that. I was contacted by the family, and they had these creatures were coming in at night. They were looking in the windows at their small children, and they were rightly so very frightened. And I gave him suggestions, and then when Lee and I were talking, he said he could go up there personally and take a look. So I had him go take a look, and he told the people what they should and shouldn't be doing in accordance with things I told him. And they employed those, and the creatures actually left. In fact, they were seen by quite a number of people on the north side of that town, and eventually they left. And what we found out a year later was, the head of the house, he decided to attract them by leaving all the trash outside and accumulating. And we were kind of upset by that because we went to great lengths by Lee going there, and employing the things that we knew to help that family get rid of these creatures, and he was eliciting their return. So, sometimes people are hard-headed. They don't want to listen.
And I found it fascinating because I've driven by that area countless times, hundreds of times. Had no idea that from the highway just going, in this case, you'd be going east a little bit, there's all this activity going on.
Sure, how would you know?
Yeah, you'd have no way of knowing. It makes you wonder, well, what other areas are having activity? And I think Lee actually went in further. He did some investigation. Isn't that the place where he'd gone in and walked into the woods and realized he was being flanked by these things?
I can't remember if it was there or if it was more toward his parents' property. There was a lot of things going on in that region.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, it's not just the fact that people want to leave their homes just because they're scared, but it also, things like property damage. I mean, Tammy's story, remember her neighbor had, I can't remember exactly what, if they had their doors bashed in, or maybe something on their roof and everything, but also people want to leave because, I mean, they're having their pets disappear, disturbing the people's sleep and so forth. So there's all kinds of reasons to sometimes get the heck out of there.
Sure, and it depends on their outlook about things too. I mean, some people stay in their property and just kind of deal with it. Other times, they want to bug out. I mean, there was, a couple of situations we knew about in Southern Oregon where, families had owned property for 100, 150 years in an area and never really been bothered by the creatures. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what exact changes occurred in those places, but it prompted this very aggressive behavior towards the people who lived in those places.
Well, and you and I, we talked about that. Speculation, of course, but what about there's kind of a changing of the guard with the creatures themselves. So the old generation is passed on, and now the new ones come in and they have a different view and a different perspective.
Right. And that was my thought. It was the only thing, especially in one of those circumstances where actually there were two things. And of the two different locations, one location was the only thing I could think of was a change in circumstances there. The variables was that maybe a new alpha was in charge of this particular group, and we see this with monkeys and apes. The alpha and its temperament and everything can really affect how the group behaves. So sometimes they can be very good, sometimes they can be very bad. So that was my thought about that location. The other one where there were 4 males who were coming in, acting very aggressive to the home. And the people who lived there, my thoughts on that one, it was probably, sort of a status building exercise, for gaining mates. And we see that in primates. It's a very common thing, especially in us humans, with the big fancy car and all this stuff. These are all status gaining type things, largely geared towards mate attraction. So I think that's what was happening in that situation.
Well, in situations like that, you have the 4 males. Does the alpha most of the time turn out to be the largest of those males?
We don't know. It's not necessarily a key. It's a big factor, especially with other primate species. But I remember watching a film in college one time where they were talking about status among primates, and they showed a group of chimps and the alpha and the different traits that made that individual the alpha. But they introduced some outside things that really changed the group dynamics. They put in this, I think it was a 5-gallon square metal can, empty can. And one of the sub-males, who was quite a ways down the chain of hierarchy, got a hold of this thing and started rolling it and making this big noise and everything. All of a sudden, he was raised very high up on the level of, the chain there, because he was able to make this loud noise and demonstration. So it really changed the dynamics of the normal group dynamics there. So do these things do things like that? We don't know.
I actually find that kind of humorous. It
was, yeah.
I don't know. He gets this can and makes a ruckus with it, and now he's the big chimp.
Yeah, it was interesting what a difference that made.
Yeah, and you wonder if you just wonder if possibly that was something that even caught the researchers or the observers off guard.
Actually, it was a big surprise to them, as I recall.
Yeah, I bet. Can you comment a little bit on Hanobia? Was that did that really happen, or is that kind of urban legend?
Well, I'm kind of up in the air about some of it, because I've been told from a number of sources that some was legit, some wasn't. I don't know. I mean, when I talked to Mike, he seemed very credible. So I some of it I don't know. I really don't. So I can't really comment either way. I mean, I thought he was legitimate, but, everybody has their opinions.
Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating story. The other one...
It was, yeah.
And this is before my time, when I joined Creek Devil, was a gal that had grown up in an area that you grew up in. I think it was Rebecca.
Yeah, we did
her encounters.
We did a 4-part interview with her.
Yeah, she had some pretty scary stuff. And as I recall, one of the key elements in that whole story was their folks had bought the place on a below market value.
Yeah, well, property in that area, that was only about 4 miles from where I grew up. So that area property was relatively inexpensive back then. I remember we moved from a 40-acre parcel down to a 10-acre parcel, and my dad, I think he only paid $28,000 for that. So in 1970, so back then property values weren't real high in those areas, and I don't know if they were below market. I think they were probably average prices for that time. And I don't remember exactly what she said they paid for that. But now that area also was a little different. The ground composition was different than where I lived. Where I lived, there was very good soil, and it was deep topsoil. And I know that because I dug fence post holes a lot growing up. And some of the topsoil could be as much as 3-4 feet thick. And probably, old lake bottom, things like that. But over where she lived, it was very rocky. That was kind of glacial till, that area. So not a whole lot of topsoil, so that might have been reason, the property wasn't valued as much as, say, out where I was, just a few miles away. I know where you're going that thinking about the creatures, but we don't know. There was nobody talked about that stuff back then. In fact, even today, it's still, people are still kind of grudgingly coming forward with their accounts. And I know some people went to high school with some of them who still won't talk about it.
Wow. There's, and speaking of the creatures, I have a real quick question from one of our subscribers, and he wants to know, he loves the Creek Devil shows. He says, how do we come up with the name Creek Devil? Where does that come? What's the origins of that?
Actually, one of John Green's books, he has a list of names on the cover. I think it's a Sasquatch file. And there were quite a number of local names, in fact, for every area where people had seen things long before, Bigfoot or the word Sasquatch was coined. They had their own names for these things, and Creek Devil was one of those area-specific names, and Mountain Devil, and there were a whole list of them. So lots and lots of different names. That was one I always liked that one, so I chose it.
Now, doesn't it also, that's a name that wasn't coined by the Native Americans, but actually the settlers and pioneers coming out and discovering these things.
Yeah, local people.
So they didn't give them warm, endearing names. For some reason, they called them devils.
Yeah, no one gave these things, nice names. In fact, the native folks, most of their names, in fact, the best name you can come up with is probably, and I know some tribes, they call them like Big Brother and things like that, but oftentimes the name translates into, wild man of the woods, things like that. But also there are plenty of very negative terms, imparted on them.
Well, and that's a good point. Going back to the history of the occult, and originally, I think in your book you'd mentioned that the people who are familiar with the area, which were the Native Americans, no, they're just not going there. You couldn't persuade them to go there for anything.
Well, there's a story in a book called Paintings of an Artist, I believe it is. But the author is Paul Kane, and he worked for the Hudson Bay Company, and I believe the incident was around 1834. I could be mistaken on that, but he was on trying to get natives from the Vancouver area of Washington State to take him up what's now called the Lewis River towards the volcano Mount St. Helens, as he termed it. And they absolutely refused. They couldn't bribe him. He couldn't do anything. No one would take him up there because of the cannibal giants who lived there.
Well, and that's interesting because I think of the story that, I have a family member, his father was working for the Forest Service in Northern California when they're putting in the roads. Mm-hmm. And they had guys, we've talked about this, but the crew that would go behind the road graders were called swampers, and their job was just to pick up the debris that the road grader left behind, rocks and stuff like that, and throw it off to the side. And excuse me, so they would actually take a spare tire for the road grader with them. And one time they found the tire had been picked up and thrown overnight across a ravine. And they had decided, well, the crew supervisor decided the way we're going to take care of this is we'll just run a cable down there, send some guys, you can hop across a ravine, and we'll attach it to the tire and drag it back up. The Native American crew, not a chance. They're not going down there.
Right.
Nothing doing. And what I took away from that is this is before Ground Zero. I mean, this was a long, long time ago. They had knowledge that nobody else had. So they knew something that the other people didn't know.
It's interesting when we're talking about names from the Native Americans. And if anybody out there, is interested, you can get a hold of my first book, Notes from the Field Tracking North America Sasquatch. In the beginning of it, I have a list of different tribes and their names for the creatures. And it's very interesting. Some of them are like, one is, the translation is, of course, timber giants, bushman. Bushman is one of the common ones. Bad evil seeker. This one is from the Quinault, giants, skookum, strong, powerful, dangerous being, devil of the forest, cannibal women. Let's see, another one here is Coast Salish, wild man of the woods. Here's one, an undesirable sight which portends bad, luck or disaster. This one's interesting, the Yakima Indians. Owl, woman, monster. Now, that conjures up some of the vocals people talk about. So
it does, and I've noticed none of those names are warm or very endearing.
This one's from the Chinook. Skookum or Skookum, evil god of the woods. So, I mean...
Don't forget Teddy Bear of the Woods.
So, I mean, there's some very interesting ones. I mean... See, now the Lakota, Western Sioux, they call them, big elder brother, but, that's not necessarily meaning it's a warm and fuzzy kind of a thing. The Oglala Sioux, their term is the big man. So, anyway, there's...
Well, doesn't that, some of those names almost dovetail, again, what some of the pioneers and the settlers, for example, I think in Ohio, they called it the grass man.
Right. And here's a thought, too. I'm sure that, a lot of the, the settlers who came in, lots of them got to know the native folks who were in those areas and weren't always, not everybody was at war. A lot of them got along, very well with the natives. And I'm sure they talked about these things. And some of the Anglo terms, like Creek Devil, things like that, were probably derivatives or their understanding of what the native folks were talking about.
Yeah, and also remember that the fact that there are all these names and these groups of Indians didn't know each other, but they're all talking about the same creature, which is more evidence that it existed, because if they're all talking about the same creature but they don't have any contact with them, it would just have one name.
Yeah, it's that continuity over time and geography, just like the stories themselves.
That's actually a really interesting point, because I watched a documentary years ago, and the person being interviewed was actually, I think she was an anthropologist for either the Forest Service or the BLM, I think it was the Forest Service. And she believed in the creatures, and they asked her how come. And it wasn't any of the evidence she'd seen, but it was the linguistic evidence. At that time, she had over 500 names of the creature from different tribes throughout North America. I think it included Canada as well. And her point was, well, let's see, they didn't have mass communications back then. So, the West Coast Indians didn't talk to, the other tribes. There wasn't intercommunication, but they're all talking about the same thing, and the descriptions had too many similarities to ignore.
Right. And, in my book, I just put a sampling in there. There were, I think when I was looking, I stopped at around 90. And I didn't put that many in the book, but a good enough representation to give a reader an idea that, hey, this is, fairly widespread. It's fairly common. And not just in this continent, but elsewhere around the world also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tom, go ahead, Brian.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Tom, there was a comment from a listener on YouTube who had an encounter. Did you want to bring that up so we can maybe get him to contact us?
It's a good point. Yes, absolutely. And just before I get to that one, I got a comment here from one of our listeners, Kit Carr. Kit Carr loves the term sack lunch. How true people haven't got a bloody clue what they're dealing with, and you wouldn't get me out there at night. Don't mind admitting it. Well, guess what? I'm with you 100%.
It's funny. I come up with those silly terms just the way my sense of humor goes sometimes. Instead of just hitting something right directly on the head and making it scary or something. It probably goes back to my time in the military. You're always kind of a little on the sarcastic side when you're joking about something. So sack lunch just popped into my head. Things pop into my head like that all the time.
Well,
I like Don't Be a Happy Meal.
Yeah, that's another one. It'd be kind of an unhappy meal, I think.
With this topic, it's gallows humor. You need it.
It is, yeah. There are plenty of gruesome things, and things that we don't talk about for good reason, because there's no sense in scaring the daylights out of people. However, I do want to caution people to be extremely careful. This isn't some warm, fuzzy creature out there. You want to exercise extreme caution when you're out and about. And it's not just because of these things. We've mentioned it before. You can have simple accidents that can turn into much more serious situations. There's lots of wildlife to be concerned about out there and to be wary of, and to be cautious. So I just tell people, if you're out and about, just be careful.
What is the, I think the Army has a kind of a phrase. It's one is none, two is one.
Yeah, probably. I don't know.
In other words, don't be out there alone.
I don't know.
If you're out there alone.
I was a cavalryman, so they stuck us out there alone anyway, so we probably never heard that term.
Right. The cavalry is a little different.
You can say that. For my cavalry brothers out there, I'm sure they'll understand that.
Adolfo Castillo, he says, wow, the roar of a lion, a monster in the wilderness. We've heard the same thing this year in 2020. Early archery season, my grandson and my hunting buddy of 10 years, they don't believe it. I know what it was, very scary. This was a very angry vocalization, loud thundering growl and roar. They didn't want us there, and we left running out of there, Oregon. So that was the one that I was referring to. So Adolfo, if you want to get a hold of us through email, is probably the best way. You can just contact us, questions@creekdevil.com, and we'd love to maybe get some more details on that.
Yeah, we'd love to hear that. In fact, Chris in Alberta him and his son had kind of a similar situation happening, and we talked to him recently, and we're going to have him on again, not this week, but next week on the Q&A, where they had the vocals while they were hunting. So, and it's, we hear this time and again from people. I think it is a very clear warning to, people are in those places, they're interrupting something with these creatures hunting or whatever behavior they're doing, and it's apparently a clear warning, back off.
And I would say probably, generally speaking, that's a warning that's heeded. With one exception that I can think of. Back in August, my buddy and I were up in the Cascades. I shared this story. I heard the warning, but because I was standing in front of my truck while the engine was running, I sort of interpreted it as like a Pratt and Whitney engine, airplane out there. And about a minute or two later, my buddy heard it, and he correctly interpreted it, and we got out of there. Got a question here. This is from Ansel, and he says, I repeatedly come across reports about animals that may have been unlucky enough to have met these creatures. They're found dead, deceased with the contents of their corpse removed, i.e. the guts. So here's a question. In your opinion, why would they remove the entrails and leave the carcass? And it's not just the entrails, it's also internal organs.
Well, I'm not sure. I actually haven't heard much of that. Usually it's the other way around. In fact, the first time I saw anything back in 1972 was a gut pile between the railroad tracks, and whatever animal they came from was gone. Why they would take something like that, I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, and I think we may have talked about it on an earlier show, that is there a higher caloric content in the organs versus the...
The question I have, too, is how do they know it was a Sasquatch that did that? Because a lot of animals, will eat, they'll start eating a prey animal in its midsection because that's a softer tissue, and they'll eat the organs before they'll go after the muscle tissue. So how do we know it was a Sasquatch that did that in those cases?
Right.
Oftentimes a Sasquatch will kill an animal and pack it off somewhere.
Well, they do, and everything
is gone.
With the person, it vanishes. And he also may have been referring to, we had a report about chimps. And now this is in Africa, where the human and chimp territories were starting to encroach on each other. Mm-hmm. The chimps were attacking the people. And what they would do is they would actually bite them in their, kind of gross, but they bite their reproductive organs and attack their internal organs.
Sure. Well, you think about it, that's some of the more vulnerable places on an opponent, so it kind of makes sense.
I don't want to put it to the test.
If you want to incapacitate an enemy, well, you go for their weak spots.
Well, kind of on that note about what Tom was asking about, though, or our listener was asking about, though, about finding a corpse and everything. This also came out, actually let me look at the date here. Oh, no, this is a few years ago, but there was a college professor, and not the one that you're probably thinking of, but a college professor actually found bite marks on a bone of a prey, and he compared the tooth marks, the bite marks, and he came up with he determined that it was a hominid, and then he compared it to a 5'9" human, and he compared like the bite marks that a human would take out of out of just a natural bite. Mm-hmm. And he goes through all these things here. He talks about he estimates the footprint on a, well, I assume this is a footprint. Yeah, about 10.76 by 3.6 for a 5'9" person. And then the footprint that he estimates of this creature, based on just the bite marks alone, would be 16.7 by 4.5. And he estimates this creature to be about 8'8". So I don't know how much you can take of this, like how definitive of proof this is, but it's kind of an interesting thing, I would say.
Yeah, I don't know how definitive. It's not really definitive proof. I mean, it's interesting, but I mean, you have to look at other options. I mean, is he sure? Are they sure it's bite marks? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Without knowing the particulars, I can't really comment. Do you have it in an article? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I think, Brian, he's asking if you had an article on this.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I was in mute. Yeah, so it is from the Suburban Times, and this is from 2016, so I don't know where this is based off of, but this is from Washington, actually. And
can you send me a link to that, and I'll look it over, and maybe we'll discuss it next week.
Sure, yeah.
I want to read it first before I comment.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so we got a question here from Bryce. Okay, sperm whales use echolocation and sonar to find their way around, stun giant squid. I watched a show on the History Channel, and humans are also capable of echolocation without the use of technology. Well, I'd like to see that show. My question is, could this be the reason some people feel stunned, and maybe how Sasquatch can see you without you seeing them? And actually, I like that question. In other words, I think what he's asking is, so Bryce, I apologize if I'm misinterpreting, but I think he's asking if they use infrasound as a kind of like a echolocation, like bats and
I don't think it's
whales
I
and
don't
that
think
sort of thing.
No, I don't think infrasound would be used for that. And if you look at how our brain interprets sound, how that works, and I go back again to my college days when I was majoring in psychology, and one of the courses I took was on how your senses work. I did a lot of neurobiology courses. So how you know a direction is something, or how you know when you hear something what direction it comes from. Everybody ever wonder that? Okay, what your brain does, and it works on having two ears, right? You hear a sound, let's say it's from your right rear, like when the Sasquatch came from my right rear when I was 16. How did I know what direction it was coming from? Well, sound travels at a certain rate of speed. It hits one ear at a different time it hits the other ear. So your brain calculates that speed, by which the impulse was received, so you know exactly which direction something comes from. I think that's probably what we're talking about with the Sasquatch, knowing where something is. It could be a very slight sound, but in the dark, that's probably how they know where something is, by sound.
Yeah, and you've mentioned in the past, primates are primarily visual. That's their main sensor.
Yeah,
sight and hearing.
Exactly. Yeah, vision is number one, hearing is number two, and they occupy the largest
let's think
part
about
of the brain.
guy. Yeah, there's the story that I can't remember the researcher, but he got stuck in the woods and decided to kind of nest himself under a bunch of leaves.
Bob
and
Titmus.
One of these things was Titmus. Yes, I always thought about that story. I would. And for $1 million, I wouldn't want to be in his situation.
It didn't know where he was. It knew he was there, but it didn't know where he was. Because, number one, he didn't make any sound, and he was covered up, so his smell was camouflaged for the most part, except for his face. That's probably how it knew he was there, but it couldn't find him.
But it was looking for him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it raised quite a ruckus, apparently.
And it probably didn't have good intentions.
No, he said it looked like a freight train went through there when he got up in the daytime.
Wow.
In that case, was the Sasquatch by itself, or did it?
Apparently it was alone, and it was, by the footprints, identified as the same creature in the 1967 film. And this was several years before that film was made.
Okay, interesting.
So Patty was not friendly. He was trying to make Bob Titmus into a ham sandwich, but was unsuccessful. No midnight snack.
So footprints like that are that distinguishable or indistinguishable?
Yes. Yeah, just like fingerprints. And that's the same with humans. Everybody's feet wear differently. It's like if you try to put somebody else's shoes on, how uncomfortable they are, even though they might be the same size. It's because the wear patterns are different with different people.
Yeah, that's true, I guess. So Will, speaking of Titmus, we've talked a lot about him and Green, Danae, Renee, and so forth. What can you tell us a little bit about Reinhold Messner?
Don't know.
Oh, okay, because he supposedly wrote a book in 2000. He supposedly saw a Yeti, so I was just curious if you had heard of him before.
I may have seen the name. It doesn't ring a bell, though. I mean, there's so many people in this subject, that are all self-proclaimed experts, and I just don't pay attention. It's not an interest to me to, to know all these people. It doesn't further my work at all. My work is out in the field and in research, and if I contact somebody, it's because they have something interesting that I'd like to talk to them about. But other than that, just not a big interest of mine.
Yeah, I was actually gonna ask you about these days. Does most of your research come from like books and articles, or in the field?
It's a combination.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't really give you specifics because there's so much going on all the time that, and I just don't think of it in terms of, okay, I'm doing 25% of this and 75% of that. It's just whatever is occupying my attention at the time and where that leads.
Right. Each year is different than the next, or different than the one before.
Each week is different.
Yeah.
And Tom can attest to that.
Right. So now this is a personal question of mine. We're just talking about the Yeti, kind of brought this up. The Yeti had a unique footprint. The very first one, I can't remember the guy's name that found it up there, but it had that like curved toe. And somebody had made a replica of that foot, but have we seen instances, are there any other instances of a foot similar to that, to the Yeti's footprint, only, I guess, also in the Asian continent, but also specifically, what about here in North America that you're aware of?
It's terrible. I was just looking. That's in my book too. I have a copy of it's an artist rendition of that because those tracks were found in the snow. Eric Shipton,
right,
is who we're talking about, and and I was actually in contact with his nephew in England, who was very happy that I wanted to use the photographs that his uncle took, to keep him, his name out there and what he did. That was a very unusual set of footprints, and the toes, I don't know if that was an accurate representation because it looks like two large toes, and in the artist rendition of the cast, they're curved. But typically the Yeti has the same foot that the Sasquatch does, for the most part.
Okay, so that's...
Although,
all right.
I will add this, though. We've talked about footprint differences. In some of the tracks, the casts that are sitting here on my desks and table and all over the office here, on some of those prints, the great toe and the one next to it are of similar size, while the other three are smaller and sort of angle away. So my thoughts are that this particular type of foot has some relation to the one that Shipton found, that type, because when you look at the prints in the snow, they have the two toes, the great toe and the one next to it, are of similar size. Not necessarily, I don't know about the angle and all that, but they look like two large toes, and the other ones are very small. So there may be a precedent for that.
Well, and also, just a thought kind of came to mind. I don't know if there's anything to back it up, but, the creature is supremely adapted to the outdoors, and that's, the only place they're located or they're found. Is it possible that it was just a damaged toe? Is it possible that this was a toe that had been broken in some fashion, healed up that way? We don't know.
It wasn't just the one foot, it was both feet.
Oh, it was.
So It would have had to have been, some form of a birth defect. I suspect it's more along this type of foot. Doggone it. I was trying to find the picture in the book here, but maybe we can put that picture on the website so people can see what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'll post it up there. So if it's a birth defect, do they have banjo playing Yeti out there?
Well, we don't know.
Sorry, I had to throw that in. Dry humor.
Will, when you come across footprints, do you just take the cast, or do you actually go and kind of find out, or do you follow the tracks, or you say, "Oh, I'm not going to do that"?
Oh no, I have a specific method for documenting footprints. So, I count the tracks in the line as much as possible. Do a lot of measurements, cast some of the better ones. So there's a whole methodology that I use.
Yeah, but you don't want to find out where they end up, though, is what I'm saying.
Well, I'm not interested in becoming the Sasquatch, so I'm not going to go too far.
What Patterson and Gimlin did, though, for a while until they lost it, right? Well, No. Patterson and Gimlin didn't. It was Bob Titmus that followed the tracks. Gimlin and Patterson. And I asked Bob Gimlin this specifically. I asked him, why didn't you guys follow the tracks? And his answer was, we didn't know where the other two were, because there were three creatures in the area that was known. And they were afraid of where the other two might be and didn't want to walk into something bad. Right.
Titmus went there 10 days after the filming, and he followed the tracks.
Oh, okay. But I do remember that you and your friends, when you were young, you guys actually did do that, but you
we did.
and you lost, or they.
Well, the tracks were in heavy frost, and we followed them for quite some time. In fact, when we had John on, he talked about that too. We followed them for a long ways, a mile or so, and by that time the sun came out and melted the trail essentially, so we couldn't follow them anymore. But there have been cases like, this Skamania County Sheriff Bill Klosner. I want to say 1969, he and a deputy or two and a dog handler followed a line of tracks for more than 5 miles before they gave up the chase. So it's been done.
That's a long ways.
That's a
5
long
miles,
ways.
My gosh.
And the Hinden told me about things like in Bluff Creek when they'd be called on track finds there by the loggers and road builders. In fact, one case he was very specific. He counted 998 tracks in a line of tracks. Now you have to remember, this wasn't just a pristine line of tracks. The road crew had been in there working. They destroyed the vast majority of tracks through their work. The tracks that the Hinden counted were off the road and elsewhere where they hadn't been working. So there were thousands of tracks in those lines.
Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't just, 1 or 2 tracks or 10 tracks. It was thousands. There was another case. I remember Roger Patterson near the town of Woodland, Washington, went to a ranch and counted more than 1,000 tracks in a line there. So when you look at lines of tracks back in those days, there were many, many tracks. It wasn't just a handful like you hear people talk about today.
Oh, that's good. That's interesting to know.
The last line of tracks I found was in a very small area that was really super brushy. So the small area that was open, and I counted more than 100 tracks in that spot. I'm sure there were thousands, but I was unable to find them because of the thickness of the brush and grass and things like that in the area.
Wow. Well, I got a similar question, kind of along these lines, and actually it brings up a really good point. Randall wants to know, he's asking which episode, because we've talked about the different types of Sasquatches, types 1, 2, 3, and 4, but actually you've explained it in the subcategories. There's 22 of them.
Well, 22 variations, not different types.
Yeah.
You have to make the distinction there.
Okay. Variation species. I don't know off the top of my head which episode where you discuss the different Sasquatch types. Maybe we could do it right here and now, unless you remember the episode.
I don't. And at some point, I'm going to put that in a book. I'm working on that idea, so that I will publish that at some point. But my information was from an inside source. It wasn't something that I invented or created. It was told to me specifically. This was back around 2012. So my source told me that there were two groupings, and there were 2 subcategories in each one of those groupings. So I called them types 1 through 4, just for expediency purposes. In grouping 1, I will say grouping 1 and grouping 2. Grouping 1 has types 1 and 4. This is my own designation. Group 2 has 2 different types. Those are the 2s and 3s. And recently we had information when we had Natalia on, and we're going to have her back for episode 100. Folks, for you listening, she had a lot more information to relay to us. We just didn't have the time to cover it, so we're going to bring her back for episode 100, along with some other stuff we're planning, so she can go through more of that material. So, but anyway, again, my source who told me about the various types, I messaged him when she was talking about the things that were seen in Europe around the world, around the Second World War, as having, and people who would see them weren't sure whether they were primate or dog-like or canine-like. And he said that troops, Allied troops moving north to the Italian mountains, encountered these creatures, and he said, yes, it was the type 3 like we have in the Mississippi River drainage system in this country. Very similar to those. So they have that protruding face that looks very canine-like or baboon-like. And it's the one variety that kind of stands out amongst the rest, the types 1 and 4s. Type 1 is like what you see in the Patterson film. They have very blocky, squared, what witnesses have called Lincoln log-like teeth. No canines, sort of the conical head, very muscular build. The type 4s are more like what you see with the Minnesota Iceman. No hair really on the face, smaller in stature. Then we talk about the other grouping with the type 2s and 3s. The type 2s are very similar to the type 1s, except they had very pronounced canines. And they're more often seen in groups, move on all fours more often than the type 1s do that are more bipedal. They all will move on all fours occasionally, but and then the type 3s are this one with a protruding face.
So, quick follow-up here, and this is pun intended. Any of those footprints that they leave, I'm sure they have slightly different footprints. Any of them canine?
No.
Look like a dog?
Not at all. In fact, the footprints are all very similar, except and when you look back at people like John Napier, who was an anthropologist from England, he was one of the first people who made the comment or noted that there seemed to be 2 variations by the morphology of the feet. So it falls right in line with what my source told me about the 2 main species groupings. So, you can identify them by the feet, but absolutely no canine with these kind of feet. They're all primate type feet.
I'm disappointed.
I'm sure some listeners will be, but sorry about that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there'll be comments.
Yeah. The type 4s I find really fascinating because they're completely different than type 1, 2s, and 3s, which are more apish. The type 4s are the ones that can almost be human, but I think like the Minnesota Iceman, that thing was so aggressive.
I wouldn't call them more human. They're just, I guess, people when the description I've heard most often from witnesses are what they would call like caveman-ish. Maybe more ish than caveman. I don't know.
Well, that was the one that Deborah from the UK said that she probably saw. And they have the spatulated hands, which feet, fascinates me.
Yeah.
And just for our listeners, can you briefly explain what that means?
Well, when you look at those photographs, they're very wide and short. And here's the thought too. I mean, with the other variations of Sasquatches, just because of their size, the hands might be the same, but they don't look the same because of the proportion when you're looking at them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They may still have that wide, short hand. And what I mean, the hand isn't necessarily short. The palm of the hand, if you're looking at our hand, the palm of the hand is roughly the same length as your fingers. If you did kind of a measurement comparison, pretty close. With the Sasquatch, it's very different. The palm is longer and the fingers are shorter in proportion.
Oh, interesting.
Which is more similar to, I would think, an ape hand.
Okay, and that's kind of the definition of a spatulated.
Well, spatulated, they've got that wide. It's very wide looking, wider than normal looking, I guess, in our perception.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, the type 4s are just kind of interested. They're almost, this is just my own thinking, that they could almost be something very, very different than what we think of as Sasquatch type 1, 2s, and even 3s.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just looking. I was just going to do a quick check here. Let's see. Well, let's see what they talk about spatulated. Well, it says shaped like a spatula. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, there you go. I mean, it doesn't get any clearer than that, right?
Well, they say to longitudinally and splayed open. Well, it's just basically kind of a short, wide structure is what we're talking about. And if you look, there people have put, drawings and things for the Minnesota Iceman. In fact, in my book, The Minnesota Iceman, I think there's on the cover. Let's see. Let me take a look real quick here. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the cover, there was a couple of images, and it shows the hands of the creature there. A couple different versions from artists who made this based on the drawing, or based on the creature in the ice itself, it shows these hands that look kind of disproportionately large, wide and so forth, that sort of look like a spatula. That's another shameful plug for my book.
There you go. Absolutely. And also the face has, I think they have less facial hair, don't they? So
actually, the type 4s are mostly devoid of hair in the face. And it's the only variation, and they can also be bald, which distinguishes them from the other variations.
Yeah, so they're, and as far as regions, I think they're kind of more Midwest and East Coast.
Northeast.
Northeast,
and
okay.
into northeastern Canada.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Well, fellas.
Of course,
go ahead.
I was going to say the other variations can also be balding too, just based on age.
Well, no, actually they're not.
Not all of them.
This all comes from my source also, that the other types, like other primate species, they keep their hair. It's just this one particular type that loses it. Well, fellas, any final questions or thoughts? We're running low on time for this segment.
I think that's all that I have. I want to thank everybody for their excellent questions. Remember to subscribe, hit the like button, and send us your questions. We'd love to hear them.
Absolutely. Brian, do you have anything further?
Not really questions, but just a couple of brief comments that maybe you can real quickly address. Okay, so there's this guy in Kansas, and he's a researcher, and he did this conference where he was answering questions, and somebody asked him about the use of darts, like to tranquilize, and he said that wouldn't work because you don't know how much of the poison, if you will, to put in there. And he also said to do so, to get a tranquilizer into a Sasquatch, you'd have to be about 10 feet away. You'd have to get really close. And he said you'd be stupid to do so. And he says that darts, it doesn't work like the movies do, where they just go down instantly.
That's correct.
And then the other great point that he made is somebody asked him, okay, why isn't somebody successfully killed it? And he came up with a few different reasons for that. He said, one, these things are so fast. So if you're trying to shoot them while they're hunting and they don't notice you, you're likely not going to be able to hit them, number one. And number two, the same thing. If you get too close to them and they see you and you're trying to shoot them, you'd have to be about 10 feet away to get the right type of shot to maybe hit them in a vulnerable spot, like an eye, for example. And if you do so from 100 yards away, it's first of all, the bullet's probably not going to do much anyways, and they're just going to be pissed and then come after you. So I thought those were some great points that he made.
Yeah, I mean, and there's other things. I'm not going to go too far into the killing of one, but when you look at the Minnesota Iceman, where Frank Hansen, who was an Air Force captain, hunting, with some other individuals, shot a deer took off. He says, I'm going to go get the deer, you guys go on, and I'll meet up with you. And he encountered 3 of the creatures there with a dead deer. 2 took off running. The other one came at a dead run towards him, and he shot it in the eye and killed it. Or at least he shot it and it went down. He took off running, and he didn't come back for a couple weeks and found it there frozen. So that's an example of one being killed. It's not routinely done for various reasons, and I'm just not going to go into that. I'm just going to say don't go out and shoot at one. It won't be good for you if you do that. So, because they're not alone. Their pals are going to get you. On the tranquilizer thing, he's correct. And I probably know him. He's probably one of our people, in fact, who made those comments. But Grover Krantz, that was his idea. And the problem with trying to tranquilize something is you need to know its weight to be able to have a correct dosage. And I've seen the things up close and personal, you're not going to get one of those darts through all that thick hair. Getting a lucky shot, good luck doing that. So, and yes, you're correct. They're not just going to drop on the spot. They might take off. And again, you shoot at one, his pals are close by. So good luck with that one. You're going to be a ham sandwich. All right, fellas. Well, I think that'll do it for this segment. Folks, stay tuned for our third segment.
Welcome. These 8 stories are a collection being brought to you by William Jevning and are being narrated by me, Jim Sower. Story 1. Sasquatch Story. Sonoma County, California. Sonoma County, California. Just a story. Terrifying screams heard. No sighting. July 1980. Well, I have collected enough information from various Bigfoot sites about screams to conclude that I heard a Sasquatch on a bicycle touring trip from Portland, Oregon to Santa Barbara, California in the summer of 1980. My girlfriend and I arrived at Fort Ross Historical Park north of Jenner, California, in Sonoma County on an evening in mid-July. We decided to camp there at Fort Ross as it was marked as a campsite on our map, but it had no campsites. There was no one at the main house nor around the fort, old Russian fur trading fort, or on any part of the grounds. We rode to a campground further south, but it was too expensive. We decided to ride back to Fort Ross. We camped to the left of the upper parking lot under some Monterey pines next to a picnic bench. We ate dinner and went to bed at around 9 p.m. At approximately 1 a.m., a scream 20 feet to the left of the tent, our heads were facing the ocean, a blood-curdling scream of various sounds in succession that lasted at least 9 seconds. It frightened me to my bone marrow. I froze in fear, knowing that whatever made the sound was huge. It was so close, I could hear the tremor in its throat. Since I'm a musician, I realize how much force it takes to make a sound that loud. I've also been camping all my life, and have heard various animals, but this was different. I have been told it was a bear or a mountain lion, but I don't think so. Anyway, my girlfriend said in a whisper, "What the frick was that?" I started to reach for a flashlight, and her hand grabbed my wrist with a vice-like pressure so I didn't move. We remained frozen, listening to every little noise for an hour. Incidentally, there were sheep running free everywhere going "Bah! Bah!" and they didn't stop making noise when the scream occurred. Finally, my girlfriend fell asleep, and I remained on guard with my hands hovering around the tent pole to use as a weapon, thinking that at any moment it would stick its fanged head into our tent. At around 2:30 a.m., I guess, I heard another scream down by the fort in the lower parking area. I figured it wasn't coming back, so I fell asleep. It didn't occur to me the next morning that it was a Sasquatch, so I didn't look for footprints, nor did I hear it walking the night before. This is the end of Story 1. Story number 2. A story from Tehama County, California. Summer 1977, 12 o'clock a.m. No sighting, just an odd occurrence. Nearest town, Chester, Highway 36 at Lost Creek Road. Willow Springs Campground in the Mount Lassen National Forest. Directions, take Highway 36 out of Red Bluff, then Wilson Lake Road to first right. The road number is 29 North 18. It leads right into Willow Springs Campground, Lassen National Forest at 530-595-4444. My grandpa, my uncle, and I have been working in the area picking up sugar pine and digger pine cones for about 3 days or so, and had planned on being there for around a week. We were camped in a lower campsite in this campground, just off the main cinder road coming by the camping area. I remember the camp was right next to a creek, and each night we would hear the deer coming down to the creek to water, and would occasionally shine our flashlights and see them drinking. One particular night, we were sitting around relaxing, and I commented that it was strange that we didn't hear any deer in the creek. In fact, I don't recall even hearing any crickets or any of the usual nighttime noises. There was a group of people camped above us about 100 yards or so up the hill, and they hadn't been there camping as long as we had. The three of us could hear the people in the camp talking and such. Then it was quiet. Suddenly, someone in the upper camp shouted, "Hey!" Then some loud talking, and then this growl, scream noise. It was very loud and sounded as if it came from a fairly large animal. My uncle and I looked at each other, asking each other what the heck that noise was. And we looked at my grandpa, who was smiling and chuckling, which I found to be very odd unless it was to cover up being frightened himself. My grandpa was a retired logger from Oregon. My uncle had also spent considerable time in the woods, working as well as hunting most of his life. I had spent a lot of time in the woods, also hunting and working for my uncle, but had never heard a sound like that, nor had the rest of us. My grandpa said he thought it was probably a bobcat or cougar, but my uncle and I had never heard any animal make that kind of sound, not to mention the fact that those animals will most likely stay away from a loud camp and may venture closer when it is dark and quiet. Anyway, while we were wondering what the first noise was, there began a lot of hollering and another loud growl scream from the upper camp. Vehicle doors slamming, and then the vehicle took off down the road, tires throwing cinders. They were out of there but fast. We, my uncle and I, were shaken up, but too proud to admit it to my grandpa. We didn't hear anything else from the upper camp. Nothing. I don't know if they left anything up there, or how they were camped or anything. I do know that they didn't come back. We went to bed as it was getting late, and I was so afraid to make any sound, fearful that it would hear me breathing and come into camp to investigate. We left a couple of days later, but I don't recall hearing a deer in the creek in the evenings after that night. All of the information given here is to the best of my recollection. As for the terrain, it was heavily wooded pine forest, quite a bit of brush around the creek area. That's the end of story number 2. Story number 3. Weaverville, Trinity County, California. A young grocery clerk in Weaverville, Trinity County, took me to a point at which he came upon a light-colored Sasquatch during the winter of 1994. It was not far from Big Bar Ranger Station, where he and his girlfriend used to park and neck after work. Engaged in some heavy petting, they were interrupted by the rocking motion of his Chevy Camaro. They looked around, thinking it was one of their friends or other kids screwing around with them, but the windows were pretty fogged up. There was little visibility. Determined to confront the intruder, the young fellow bounced out of the Camaro, screaming, "Knock it off!" in a most assertive tone, only to find himself face to face in the pitch dark with a hulking figure he described as a bit taller than he was. Stunned, the kid backed up into the open car door, unable to move. He said the Bigfoot, with his left fist, wailed on the roof of his Camaro, beating it at least 3 times, but barely denting it. "I heard it breathing. Man, I'm telling you, it was alive. Scary blankety blank. I heard it breathe." The informant called to his girlfriend inside the car, in what she later described as 3 octaves higher than his usual voice, telling her to lay on the horn. Upon hearing the sound of the horn, the Sasquatch sidestepped, backing away from the car, and stared at the kid. I couldn't see his eyes or facial features, but it was clear he was facing me and looking at me. Even as dark as it was, he was only lit up by the car door light. The terrified kid said he got in the car, locked the doors, started the engine, and did a quick U-turn on Big Bar Dump Road. Amazingly, he said the Sasquatch followed them up the road where it turns onto Corral Bottom Road, keeping pace with the car for several hundred feet before trailing off or they could no longer see it. I spoke with the two informants at J.C. Cafe in Junction City for more than 2 hours. Their account never wavered, and they still showed great fear in recalling the event. The female witness never actually saw the creature, but said she heard its raspy breathing. It was evidently too dark to get much of a description other than what he could see of the creature, illuminated by the Camaro door's light. He knew right away what he was looking at, but in the shock of the moment, he was able to distinguish little. Responding to my question, "Did you see a reflection from its eyes in the car light?" he replied there was no color or light emitted from its eyes. There was no smell from the creature, and he could not tell if it was male or female, only that it was this humongous, dark, towering image that he could hear breathing quite heavily and with angry intensity. He said it kept pace with his Camaro to about 20 miles an hour. Then it trailed off, but he wasn't sure of his speed. His girlfriend, amazed by it all, only saw a blurred image through the foggy windows. A happy ending to this story, though. The Amherst couple are now married and expecting twins. This is the ending of story number 3. Story number 4. Late at Night, Canada. In June 1996, Chief Editor of Animal Watch, Alex Michael, wrote of her encounter with Sasquatch in Volume Number 1, Issue Number 10. I thought to copy the article here as I found it one of the more chilling accounts I have read, and educational as well. Late at Night, by Alex Michael. A true story. My family has always been notorious for doing things at odd hours, and as you may well know, the strangest things always happen late at night. It was an unusually warm autumn some years ago, and at 16 years of age I had just finished a summer job as an arts and crafts camp counselor. The only thing left to do was pick up a rather large trunk filled with my belongings. Unable to fit such a large trunk inside the VW Beetle I had purchased just a few weeks before, my mother was volunteered to transport it from the mountains back to the city in the larger of the family cars. Summer camp was a very wild place for me, with staff partying every night until the wee hours of the morning. My room was near the entrance of the staff residence where all these parties took place. By late July, sleep-deprived party wimps like myself were weeded out, so I built a single mattress-sized platform in the woods and then covered it with polyplastic. Bow Valley Provincial Park, an undisturbed protected forest, was only a stone's throw away. It is there that my mother, a small dog named Willow, and myself were going to retrieve my trunk at 3 o'clock on a Monday morning. Why 3 in the morning? Well, I could say it was the heat, but it was mostly because my father had not yet been told that the car would be leaving town. There was also my adolescent fear that knowledge of the platform construction would somehow reflect itself in a summer paycheck I had not yet received. My mother had to be at work by 6:30, so we had less than an hour to complete this covert action. As we approached the highway turnoff, a sliver of the moon cast a glowing border around southwestern Alberta's Mount Yamnuska. Driving several miles along the gravel road, the camp looked deserted. Summer staff had cleared out several weeks before, and a handful of permanent staff were either taking days off in the city or asleep in cabins several miles from the summer campsite. Angling off on the side of the road, my mother left the headlights on, pointing into the trees. There was some discussion about taking the 20-pound dog named Willow for protection. However, Willow's track record for wandering off severely threatened a successful completion of the mission. Plus, very uncharacteristically, the dog named Willow now refused to get out of the car and was partially hidden under the driver's seat. Car headlights were of no value after the first few seconds of meandering through the forest. We had a flashlight, but I was having difficulty remembering the exact location. The 15-minute walk turned into a 30-minute skin-scraping bushwhack, but finally we arrived at the isolated platform, even though the flashlight batteries were now dead. I assured my mother all that needed to be done was to take down the polyplastic rain cover and carry back a mattress and the trunk. It should only take 2 trips. She was noticeably silent as we began working in the darkness. My mother began untying strings securing the poly to the ground, and I was kneeling on top of the 4-foot-high platform, stretching up to reach some tangled binder twine knots tied to a tree. A pungent smell suddenly flooded the air. My eyes moved from the knots to the tall length of plastic. There, distorted through the semi-transparent poly, was a huge shadow only about 7 feet away. With the 4-foot platform and me kneeling on top, the creature was easily at eye level. A split second later, there was an incredibly loud screaming roar. Although I know of nothing to describe it, the sound was like a peacock scream, a bear growl, and a lion's roar, all somehow combined. I can't tell you if I screamed. I can't tell you much of anything other than my eyes continued to peer through the plastic at this massive shadow. My 5'3" tall mother had somehow leaped into the air and was now up on the platform beside me. Whatever it was finally turned and walked slowly away on its long behind feet. We continued watching as each heavy step could be heard contacting the ground. There were no visible ears, just a sparse mohawk-like fringe sprouting up from the tapering top of the creature's head. From behind, the upper body appeared massive. It continued to walk upright until disappearing into the trees. We stayed on top of the platform, motionless, for some time after. Then, finally, I started ripping down the plastic. I have no idea what my mother did during the next 40 or 50 seconds, but my next memory was power walking through the forest, balancing a single mattress on top of my head with one hand and carrying the handle of the trunk in the other. I assumed my mother was holding up the other end of the trunk. With Willow still hidden under the driver's seat, it was a very quiet drive home. Late at night, they say that your mind can play tricks on you, but I am so certain. Brown bears had been in the area that summer, but I have never seen a bear walk upright that smoothly for that long a time. Or could it have been a very large, long-furred man standing over 7 feet in height? I say man because intuition tells me that the creature was a male. Could it have been a Sasquatch that night? I will never really know for sure, but you can bet that I will keep telling the story as if it were. This is the end of story number 4. Story number 5. Logan Lake, British Columbia, Canada. Nearest big city, Kamloops. The informants, a man and his wife, were not too far from me, camping in the summer of 2000, and during their stay they were experiencing some rather frightful events. The reason they contacted me was because they had come across my sighting, and because theirs happened so close they wanted to talk to me. They were camping for 2 weeks, and during this time their food was being taken, and even some clothes were missing. They thought maybe coyotes or even bears, but one morning after hearing something in the campsite during the night, they woke up to find everything tossed around the campsite. Even the guy's boat on a trailer was moved a few feet. One night in particular, something hit the side window and broke it, and in the morning they found a large rock sitting there in the dirt. On another night, they said it sounded like a few people were outside their camper mumbling. Jill said it was like someone had their mouth full of food. I pictured the Sasquatches eating all their food and trying to talk to each other. After that morning incident, they cleaned up and had breakfast, when Jill had noticed bare footprints just off to the side of their camper, and they said it was obvious to them by the size of the prints that the visitor during the night had to be a Sasquatch, nothing else. They said the prints were around 18 inches long. The man put his size 12 foot inside the print, and there were still 5 or so inches more in length. They told me that a couple days later they were out in the boat fishing and actually saw this thing in their campsite while they were out in the boat. Apparently it was throwing their stuff around and making a mess of things. The couple described the Sasquatch as a reddish-brown with long arms and a funny-shaped head. They believed it to be a male because of its bulk, size, and height, which they say was about 7 to 8 feet tall. I asked if it could have been a bear, and they both replied, "As God is our witness, what we saw was a Sasquatch." After describing the arms, legs, head, and all, there was nothing else it could have been. Personally, judging by their body language and the way they were trembling while talking to me, I believe them 100%, no doubt whatsoever. The older couple said they waited in the boat for a while until they were certain it was gone, and as fast as they could, they chucked everything in the camper and left the area, only packing up properly when they got to the town where they ended up staying that night. The couple were in their 60s, very clean and neat and polite. I can't see these two spinning a tale because it's been almost 6 years since that time, and they preferred not to be bothered by it. The sighting area is no more than a 40-minute car ride from me, and it's exciting because I've actually heard of another sighting in that area, but I didn't pay much attention to the person at the time, but now I'm going to try and track him down to hear what he has to say. I'm wondering if maybe there is a Sasquatch, and it could still be in that area. Tim Martindale, Merritt, British Columbia. This is the end of story number 5. Story number 6. Teapot Hill Hiking Trail in Cultus Lake Provincial Park. My name is Sanel Hodzik, and today, December 12, 2012, at approximately 3 p.m., I was hiking with my dog up Teapot Hill Hiking Trail near Cultus Lake Provincial Park in the Fraser River Valley. The nearest town would be toward Chilliwack, British Columbia, Canada. On my way down the trail, I was changing my music on my iPhone, not really paying attention to my surroundings, when I noticed that my dog, Lila, was barking like crazy. She was about 5 feet ahead of me and staring off into the distance, so I stopped and looked ahead when I noticed something in the bushes about 50 feet ahead of me. I was so scared that I froze and just kept staring at it. After about a 10-second stare down, I switched my camera on and quickly took a picture. Meanwhile, my dog is still barking like crazy. I then picked up a rock and threw it in the direction of the thing, and then I quickly turned around and ran back up the hill. I waited about until I saw someone else coming down the hill, and I followed him closely behind all the way down. So I do believe I saw the Sasquatch or Bigfoot that day. If I could describe it, I would say he was about 8 to 9 feet tall, very hairy and big. His skin color was brownish. His face was something like a monkey or ape. I took it with a full zoom on my iPhone 4. He was about 50 yards away from me. He's in the middle rightish of the picture. Only thing I noticed really was how he was standing, looking at me. It had a long face, but bigger forehead with long hair starting from about the top of its head. Sanel Hodzik, Chilliwack, British Columbia. That is the end of story number 6. Story number 7. Letter from El Paso County, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Summer, 1991. To whom it may concern. After reading some of your stories regarding Bigfoot, I thought I would add something I have kept rather a secret for quite some years. I was a cadet at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, back in the summer of 1991. I had been at the academy for only a few weeks and was finishing up basic training when it happened. Now, the academy itself sits on the foothills of the Colorado Rocky Mountains. Basically, I could step out of the cadet area and I would be standing in the mountains. There's plenty of brush, trees, and so on to conceal just about anyone of anything you want back there. Anyhow, one night, about 9 p.m., my roommate and I were laying in bed chatting about our upcoming campout in Jack's Valley, an area just beside the academy where we did a lot of field training, when we heard what sounded like a woman screaming her head off. It was absolutely horrific to hear. What was most interesting was that prior to the blood-curdling noise, we could hear the other cadets in their rooms talking and joking. The campus was basically shut down for the night, and everyone was getting ready for the next day. I remember the ambient noise being rather loud. Then this scream came. All of a sudden, you could have heard a pin drop, it was so quiet. I turned and asked my roommate if he heard what I and everyone else had just heard. I know, what a dumb question. He looks at me and says, "Oh yeah, that's the local Bigfoot." I couldn't believe it, but of course, I heard it. He then proceeds to tell me about a buddy of his who saw a big hairy human drinking at a local lake. When it saw his friend watching it, it stood up, turned away, and walked into the forest. Of course, the next week in Jack's Valley, for me, was a very nervous affair. I was more worried about getting up at night and walking to the latrine by myself than I was running the assault course. Well, I just thought I'd add my 2 cents worth. Please withhold printing my name from this email if you decide to post it. Thank you. That's the end of story number 7. Story number 8. Lake Christie, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. My story. I don't even know where to begin. To this day, even the thought of what I am about to tell you makes every hair on my body stand up and brings tears to my eyes. Why the tears? I don't know, but they are genuine. I have never discussed this with anyone, and hadn't planned to, but after stumbling across your site, I think I've had a change of heart. I live in Ontario, Canada. It is probably for this reason that I have never said anything until now. To my knowledge, almost all Sasquatch sightings are along the west coast on the continent and along the Rocky Mountains. I don't know how many sightings have been recorded this far east, but I know what I saw and heard on a few separate occasions. I used to work at a scout camp in northeastern Ontario. It is in a very remote location, nearly an hour's drive from any civilization, and one of the only true scout camps in all of Canada. It is surrounded by lakes and large hills of dense forest on all sides, and there are a few cottages scattered here and there around the main lake and camp that it's stationed on. Lake Christie, if I remember correctly. Although I live far away from this place, I worked there every summer from 1996 to 1999. My first experience happened in 1996. I was 16 years old. As a counselor, every 2 weeks we were moved around and put in charge of different Scout and Cub Scout groups. I guess so everyone gets a chance to work with groups of all ages. On this particular rotation, I was working with one of the senior Scout groups at the camp. As part of their last week there, they had to partake in what was called a solo night. This is where each camper is driven by one of the assistant camp directors to a remote location and left for the night with the bare necessities to survive, a sleeping bag, rations for 1 day, and 2 strike-anywhere matches. It was on this particular night that I will never forget the sounds that I heard. It was late at night in August. I'm not exactly certain of the time, and I was sleeping in my tent in the upper field, which is not exactly on the upper campgrounds, but up the dirt road quite a ways and into the bush another 5 minutes walk. Altogether, probably a 20-minute walk from the main campground. In the middle of my slumber, I was suddenly awakened by a loud, deep shrieking, squealing sound that I had never heard before. I sat up in my tent, alarmed and uncertain of what I had heard. I thought maybe it was one of my colleagues playing a trick on me and the other 2 counselors who were camped up there alone for the night, or one of the other 2 for that matter. This being a camp full of staff who are well known for their pranks, I wouldn't have put it past them. Then I heard the noise again. It was even louder. At first I thought it was a skunk being attacked by coyotes or something. I have heard that sound before and witnessed it. For those who don't know, skunks actually make a sort of shrieking, squealing sound when being mauled to death. I saw it firsthand, but that is another story altogether. Editor's note. All Mustelidae, such as wolverines, weasels, badgers, civet cats, skunks, and otters, etc., emit a loud to groaning squeal or high-rolling shriek, often sounding like a woman in hopeless distress when caught by predators or in iron-set traps. The sound can be very loud and unnerving, even from a wounded rabbit. However, the sound was much deeper. Then, just as it had come, the sound stopped. I lay awake for the rest of the night, barely moving a muscle. When morning came, and the sun was bright enough, I slowly came out of my tent and walked to the main campground for breakfast. A few minutes later, the other 2 counselors came down to the main camp and gave me a mysterious glance. Then one of them approached and asked me, "Was that you making all that racket last night? You scared poor Dave half to death." I just looked at him and said, "What racket?" with a stone-cold look. He gave me a knowing look and walked away. We never discussed it after that, and no one mentioned pulling a prank on me or the other 2 that night. Sooner or later, everyone owned up to their pranks, but no one even mentioned this one at all. It was not until months later that I realized what I may have heard. I was watching a documentary on TV about Bigfoot, and a crew hunting the evasive being had recorded what they thought were mating calls of the mysterious creature. When I heard the sounds of the recording come from the TV, the memories of that night came back to me. I quickly sat up, eyes glued to the screen, and the hairs on my neck stood up again. It sounded almost identical. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Again. My next encounter was 2 years later, 1998, in August again. It was late August, and there were no more cubs for the remainder of the summer, so the designated cub field and its cabins were vacant. So, not having much to do and no kids to watch, I decided to sleep in the cub field with the rest of the staff who had no children to take care of. The cub field is exactly that. It is a large clearing in the middle of dense forest, up yet another hill. It is probably 150 yards wide and probably 200 to 250 yards long, with a row of small cabins on either side. While I laid in bed in one of the cabins, I woke a little after 12 o'clock a.m. I don't know why, but I was just suddenly awake. In the distance, I heard what I thought was howling, but I wasn't exactly sure. It sounded kind of muffled, but I was used to that sort of thing. I looked over at one of the other counselors staying in my cabin that night, and he was fast asleep. Then, out of nowhere, I heard what I thought was someone running right by my cabin. The steps were heavy and quick. I shot out of bed, grabbing my flashlight, wondering who was running around at this hour, since everyone was supposed to be in bed hours ago. I swung the door of the cabin open and shone my flashlight in the field. I couldn't believe what I saw next. About 40 feet away, diagonally from me, I saw a large, hairy creature walking across the field very swiftly. I stood there in shock, wondering what my eyes were seeing. This thing was absolutely enormous. At first I thought it might be a bear, but then realized something. It was walking upright, on 2 legs. It was very tall, bulky, and had dark brown hair covering its entire body. Then, as if noticing my flashlight, it stopped, turned, and looked at me. I could see the yellow reflection of its eyes and its face. The face seemed to be almost half human, half ape-like, having little hair on its face, but the skin was almost the same color as its hair, a sort of light brownish color. It stood there, looking at me, and I at it, for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably more like a few seconds. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake up the others, but I was frozen. I was caught up in the phenomenon that I was seeing and couldn't move. That's when I noticed the smell. It was such a rancid odor, I had to plug my nose to save from puking. Then the creature turned and began to continue its swift movement across the field, and in a matter of seconds, it was across the field, walked between two cabins, and into the dense forest. It was when it walked between the two cabins that I realized how tall this being was. I am 6 foot tall. Without standing on my tiptoes, I can reach approximately to the 7 foot 4 inch mark. This thing, as it walked between the two cabins, was taller than where the top one of the doors is. The cabins are elevated off the ground. From standing on the ground, I cannot touch the top of one of the doors. I am a couple of inches shy of it. I checked the next day. I would estimate that this thing was probably around 8 feet tall, or close to it. Again, I lay awake for the remainder of the night, my hatchet by my side. This was the scenario for many of the remaining nights of that summer before I went home. There were even sleepless nights afterwards while at home. I didn't think I was afraid of anything until that night. I tried searching for tracks the next day, but to no avail. I couldn't find anything. The next day I asked one of the head counselors if there were any large animals in the general area, such as bears, and he said, no. Apparently, there were no bears for miles and miles. I never mentioned anything about what I saw that night. I didn't want anyone to think that I was crazy. I thought I would just wait and see if anyone else mentioned something before I said anything. No one did. My last encounter was the following and my final year, yet again in August. I don't know why I went back after all of the nightmares and sleepless nights from the previous summer. I guess I thought it was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. This time, I had taken a rowboat out onto the lake with a lady friend whom I had met that summer. Yes, there are female staff at scout camps. The main beach for the camp is in a small inlet of the lake, almost like a sort of small bay, before it opens up. As I was taking her on our romantic moonlight row, I heard what I thought was somebody whistling at me. I stopped rowing. She didn't hear it, but I know I did. I looked around at the surrounding shoreline and didn't see anything. Next, I heard a splash, a little one, as if someone had thrown a rock into the water. I thought maybe another couple was somewhere along that shore. I grabbed my flashlight. She grabbed hers. We scanned the shore from the safety of our boat to see if we could spot them. We were scanning in different sections. Then I saw them. Those eyes. The yellow reflection. I focused in on them, and they had an eerie resemblance to the ones I had seen the year before. "Do you see them?" I heard her ask. Without looking away, I said, "No. You?" "No," she replied. "What is that?" referring to the eyes caught in my light. "A deer?" she asked. "Yeah, probably," I said. But I knew better. Then the eyes were gone. We then agreed that there was probably another couple out there, and we didn't want to get busy in front of other people. So I turned the boat around, and we went back to the camp. I have kept these secrets with me for 5+ years now. This is one thing I can honestly say I haven't told a single soul until now. I will never forget what I've seen and heard. Although there was no physical contact, I have been extremely traumatized from what I've experienced. All this has been put in the back of my mind until now, probably because there was a show on this Discovery Channel about Sasquatch today. Like I said before, it still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This is the end of the 8 stories. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out